The way that we're living and working has changed beyond recognition, and that's having a huge impact on the way planners are working on urban spaces. For a panel on this, chaired by Aaron Lowe of the South China Morning Post, please put your hands together as we welcome experts in the spaces of property, tech, and planning. Thank you very much.
Back as well.
So we sit according to the
Thank
picture
you.
there, yeah? All right, so we're already on.
You can sit anywhere. Maybe Steve here? Yeah.
Oh, please, I'll sit here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. The energy level's still pretty high, so I hope we'll enjoy this really important session that we have ahead of us. On stage, we have 5 really brilliant experts in the field when it comes to smart city technology, and today we'll be discussing the places that we live and work in. I think this is a topic that's all this time because of it's obviously due to land. I'm going to jump straight into it. On my left, we have Steve. If you have looked for property in this part of the world, I'm pretty sure you have come across his site. He helped build and found and built one of the region's largest property sites, Property Guru. It's used by 25 million customers and 50,000 real estates, developers and brokers monthly. On next, we have Thomas, who is the regional president for Asia Pacific Bosch Software Innovations. And Bosch has been at the forefront of developing smart city solutions, so we have plenty to share. Next to him, we have Sally, who is the Deputy Chief Customer Solutions Officer for Sanders Singbridge Group. Sanders Singbridge has been also building lots of townships, urban sites, and they've also been a forefront of developing smart cities all around the region. And then we have George, who is the Chief Information Officer APAC and Head of Technology, Data and Information Management at JLL. JLL is one of the largest global real estate firms, and he is also a keen observer of property technology in Asia. And last but not least, we have T, who is the Managing Director of Southeast Asia for WeWork, oversees the company's expansion in the region. Before WeWork, T founded SpaceMob and quickly grew the company to multiple locations in Singapore, Indonesia. And last year, in August, WeWork acquired SpaceMob. So, the smart city technologies. Let me just share a bit of my own thoughts. Over the past day and a half, we've been talking a lot about technologies, AR, VR, and I just watched this fantastic show. I don't know if you watched it. It's called Ready Player One. This fantastic movie by Steven Spielberg. So whiz and bang, really enjoyable 2 hours, right? But one thing that stood out for me amidst this whole technology-fueled world, I noticed that the cities were slums, right? And I can't help but, of course it's all fiction, but I can't help but maybe think that are we heading towards that kind of reality? Give you some facts, right? So in 35 years, 66 of the world's population will live in cities. 170,000 people are migrating from rural areas to urban areas in Asia alone. Over the next 40 years, we need to provide new urban capacity equivalent to that of the past 4,000 years. Cities today account for 80% of the world's CO2 emissions. In other words, massive urbanization, climate change, rising inequality, these mega trends are reshaping the way cities are built and the way we live. So when we talk about smart city, maybe I can just open it to the panel. Are smart cities the solution to the challenges that we are facing today? Steve, maybe you can start.
Sure. I think the first thing, well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting us here. If you think about what smart city is, and you walk around here, and I was in the sessions yesterday and on Monday night. Smart city, whenever people talk about smart city, you talk about the technology. Everyone talks about the technology. They talk about IoT, they talk about sensors, they talk about cybersecurity around that, they talk about autonomous vehicles. It's very technology driven. But really, if you think about what a smart city is, then it's not technology. Technology is just the hardware. The hardware is very much around people, and it's smart cities in my view are people centric, and smart cities that get it right are people centric cities. and that covers a broad range from safety to security to sustainability to the interconnectedness, to the creativity, the arts, the culture, the transport, the whole package to make the city a livable city. So I think the focus in terms of dialogue, in my view, should change to what we're doing to help the people, and definition of what a smart city is around people-centric.
Absolutely, I would definitely second that. If you look at Ready Player One, right, that's a very dysfunctional kind of utopia. I hope we are not going to get there, living in caravans stacked on top of one another, actually. But in any case, if we look at what smart cities can do for the citizens, right, can do for the environment, can do for the way how we live, I think that is really the exciting part. Yes, technology is a big portion of that. We are a technology provider. We love all that stuff. Actually, I could talk for hours about it. But still, ultimately, it's about how do we engage the communities, for example, right? We're working in San Francisco with the 5 Points development. It's the old shipyard area in San Francisco. And we're working with them since 2.5 years, focusing really from a user perspective. How can they actually put stuff in there which ultimately helps the citizens in that new development to live better, actually, to communicate better with one another, to have information at their fingertips about what is going on, to be able to feed back to the city government actually immediately when something is amiss. To be able to monitor, so to say, their surroundings, energy efficiency. You could talk about it forever, but really from that angle, right? What can it do for the people living there ultimately? And that is also why some of the developments, smart city developments, which I think we talked in the preparation a little bit about in Korea, etc., didn't quite work. They were not citizen-focused, right? They were technology-focused, putting in the latest, the greatest stuff. That alone doesn't do it ultimately.
Yeah, I think
Thomas, just
add one
go ahead,
thing,
please,
sorry.
Steve. Yeah.
Just on your point around, it's not like to take a up-and-coming smart city like San Francisco, which is obviously heart of Silicon Valley, and the interconnectedness and the technology innovation and creativity that takes place in that, and the brain power and the talent that exists in that city. You could say tick, 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 all the key criteria for a smart city. But then you walk on the streets, and you walk 5 meters and you see homeless people. You see streets of people living and homeless, and it's one of the most shocking things I've seen in a while. I was there in January, just to see all of that. So on the one hand, you have this contradiction, which is high technology, super smart, super talented people walking over people living on the streets. And so that inclusivity piece, and how we address, the people-centric piece is also, for me, missing around affordability, around mental health, or whatever. But that really gets to the heart of a smart city, I think.
I was just going to augment what Steve and Thomas were saying. Urbanization and city research is really a big part of what we do at JLL. We've got a cities research department in London that does this full time. One of the things that has occurred to us is because of the movement, the past movement of digital economy, there's unprecedented change in the cities. That's one phenomenon that we have to recognize. The other bit is really around how future-ready are we, how future-proofed are we in these big cities. So we produced some research that says that there are about a few attributes that one looks for in a city to be able to future-proof it. These are things like how dynamic is your technology ecosystem, how innovative is the mindset of that city, and therefore the talent associated with bringing to bear the innovation, right? How open is the market with respect to the sharing of data and things along that nature. And if you think about it, these are the aspirations of any city for the future. And the point there becomes certain cities ahead of others at the moment, but everybody will have to get there at some point because these are common aspirations for most cities to better the lives of their citizens. And that's the macro view that we have from JLL.
Yeah. I think just to add, sorry, Sally, if you don't mind, I think technology is definitely the catalyst, the driver that decentralize how things are, and that's creating different things that we're seeing now. But I think the basic fundamentals of people, human beings, you're talking about homelessness or being inclusive, I think that part is sometimes overlooked, right? I think at WeWork is something that, urbanization, for example, it's one of the main reasons why there's a company like WeWork is around. Because of that, we're serving the needs of what the working community is looking for. They're looking for better life. They're looking for something a little bit more aspirational, inspirational. And how do we design spaces? How do we redesign, re-architect, and rethink ways to really build, leveraging technology and using community as a way to build that around people. I think that sometimes is forgotten, I think, and that's something that I think is important. And I think that's one of the many reasons why I think WeWork is here today. We believe that that is an important factor to how we develop our offices, buildings, neighborhoods, and now cities as well.
Yes, Kelly.
Urbanization is definitely that key driver towards people moving towards cities. And we have built the sustainable cities, we have built the green cities now with technologies, advancement in technologies, as well as conversion in technologies. That's where now cities to be built will have to be smart. So what are the smart city initiatives like what the panelists have shared? I think the critical infrastructure must be safe, must be economically sustainable, as well as the public services will have to be transparent, responsive, and that eventually it is to connect people to come together, to come here to work and hopefully to live.
Sally, actually, I wanted to ask you a follow-on question. Ascender Singbridge is involved in building some of these smart cities, townships. Could you maybe share a bit about your work at Guangzhou?
Ascender Singbridge, right now we are in 9 countries, 28 cities. Our project spans township, mixed-use development, business park, IT parks, as well as even hospitality assets. The township that we built and the cities that we built, we went into Suzhou in 1994. And then when we were in Suzhou, we went in so-called our first phase of product. We were focusing on the products that we make, the products that we build, and in Suzhou, we were building the ready-built factories for them in Suzhou. Today, we are still there, and our product has, and the country has moved from a manufacturing base to now more services based, even knowledge based, and the infrastructure that we built as a space has now gone obsolete, and we have torn down some of this, and we are building new product for that. And Ascender Singbridge has also evolved through the times since we were in Suzhou, in China, as well as in India, where we were more product-based. We were building functional spaces. We thought that if you build a functional space, your tenants will come, your customer will come. But today it's different. We have evolved to, as a real estate solution provider, the spaces that you build, we will need to be inspiring. So what we do is the amenity spaces, we have converted it to just F&B plus fitness plus childcare centers, so that people will like to commute to where you are to work together. And as we talk about the smart cities and where we need to connect people, people is very important element. And now as a real estate solution provider, urban space being a very important part of our business, we looked at creating communities, enabling our customers to attract and retain talent. We think this is a very important aspect. Why would they want to move to this city? Why would we like to come to this space to work and live together?
In the discussion of smart cities, it would be difficult to run away from the idea that in many ways it is the government's trying to take a lead and say, like for Singapore, right? They had a vision, they looked at, say, we need to build the global smart city to attract precisely what you just talked about, talent, the best talent to come here, a livable space. But how much of smart city development, and maybe Thomas and you could share, is driven top-down, or can it be a bottom-up approach as well? How much of the people need to be involved in building this smart city?
A very interesting question, and that is where we have some of the difficulties also in engaging with the cities, right? Because a city is not one entity, actually, right? It's hundreds of entities, essentially, right? Looking at traffic, looking at disposal, looking at energy, looking at whatever, actually, right? And all of these are working on their own plans, actually, right, to make their own individual areas of responsibility better. That has been going on forever, right? And we have been engaging them, and that has normally been the modus operandi in most of the cities, actually. Some cities have gone beyond that, where the mayor, for example, have taken a very strong interest. In the Netherlands and Spain, for example, some good example, people have
Australia,
also
we
shared.
heard too.
Australia,
Barcelona, yeah.
exactly, right? And of course, Singapore as a smart nation, even one step higher. Nevertheless, that is still the exception rather than the rule from our point of view. And that is part of the problem also, where it's then difficult to actually develop a consistent, coherent approach across the city, because everybody's looking at their own individual requirements, but at some point in time, the benefit really gets pronounced when all these agencies are working together, when we are starting to look not only at developing and deploying maybe a couple of environmental sensors here and some energy kind of solutions there, but looking at that data pool, looking at that data lake, and that is what is now happening. That is what we are very excited about. We're working with the European Commission in that regard. We are seeing some cities here, especially in Australia, for example, who are looking at that very intensely, to look at that data lake, to make that available also to the general public in a consistent fashion, and that's very important, so that developers actually can then take that, like what the LTA has done here in Singapore already a number of years ago, and can then develop solutions on top of that, which maybe nobody has thought about before, right? And to address that creativity, to leverage that creativity, requires a certain consistency in approach, and that's still a challenge which we are finding actually around the world. It's a little bit better in Asia, I find, than it is in Europe, but still, that's a significant challenge.
The point, Thomas, is that everybody is moving the agenda forward, right? Every city is actually doing that.
Yes.
We see that in our research as well. So if you look at Asia Pacific, there's at least 5 cities in the top 30 cities that we think are moving faster than the others in terms of making their way to becoming a smart city. The usual suspects, we got Tokyo in there, we got Singapore in there, we got Melbourne in there, we got Sydney in there, we got Seoul in there, etc. But at the same time, we also know that in India and China, there's all these movements as well. Prime Minister Modi has announced 100 smart cities over the next several years, and we already know China is aiming to have 500 at the same time. And we know that Shenzhen's already got more what I would call electric transportation vehicles than perhaps New York City. So everybody's basically moving this agenda forward. And to Thomas's point, it's really the consistency in the approach, and the trick in bringing all of this together and the governance around that and all that sort of stuff is I think where energy needs to be spent. The fact that we have to move this agenda forward is, I think, partially behind us.
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges, though, is if you have a legacy city, which is growing so fast, it's urbanizing so fast that the infrastructure development doesn't keep up with it. So then what do? You see that to a certain extent in Jakarta, for example. It's just gone from a 2, 5, 10, 15 plus million population. More and more people moving in. So how do you deal with those kind of challenges when it's just growing so fast? And I guess one approach has been in some of these countries, including Indonesia, is the sort of decentralization approach, where you take some of the challenges, short-term challenges, out of the middle of the city. Don't try and build infrastructure in the middle of the city. Build suburban cities around the outskirts, like BSD, for example, or Bonifacio Global City in the Philippines and Manila. To a lot smaller extent, seeing Medini in Indonesia. So I think there's one approach. And therefore, you're starting with a blank piece of paper rather than the analogy being a large organization which has to change. It's obviously very hard than actually build a brand new startup, which they can then compete from scratch and take risks. I guess that's one of the challenges, particularly in Asia, where the cities, the mega cities, are growing so fast.
And I should follow up on that point, and also to bring in together with the earlier point that you made about inclusivity. One of the challenges that in trying to build smart cities of tomorrow, what do you think, T, the key challenges, the key gaps that you see today in trying to build that idealistic utopian vision of this connected, efficient smart city? Is the answer, as you mentioned, communities and people?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely the key component that kind of glues things together. I think inclusivity basically means that equates to opportunities, right? You want to build a smart city and provide the right opportunity to people, folks that are moving from rural areas to the urban areas itself. And for us at WeWork is, that's the theory and the mindset and the ethos behind what we do, right? There is no curation of a particular company or type of people or startups. We welcome everyone. We provide the right service, the right product, and allow them to basically work together and collaborate. And then because of that, look, the business that we drive into a building also allows opportunities, increase sales and profit to the neighborhood retailers, the restaurants, and everything in between. I think those are the kind of opportunities that you kind of bring in. There's some survey that's been done on WeWork just about a month and a half ago on cities like LA and New York and Chicago. We are now contributing to between 1 to 2% of the GDP, and that's about $20 over billion into those cities itself. Every time there is a WeWork space with 1,000 members, there's a 2-time economic multiplier impact where we actually generate 1,000 net new jobs into that neighborhood, into that building, that neighborhood, into that city itself. So you can imagine if you have 1,000 members of WeWork locations in different parts of town, and now you spread it across 74 cities across the globe, that's the kind of impact that you're doing, and that's why it ties back to the opportunity. So as you look at how the future of work is, you look at how you design spaces, you look at designing cities, that's the thing that I think ties things together.
What about some of the other challenges? I mean, we talk a lot about this, like security, cybersecurity, privacy issues. Will that grow in importance as you make cities more connected? George?
Sure. So you're touching on the topic of governance, really, around all of this. So there's a lot to think about there. So as an example, infrastructure and policy. When it comes to a smart city, we've all talked about this. We're saying that the smart city is largely about benefiting the citizen of that city, improving the life of that individual, making it more productive, making it more effective, making it more secure. On the other side, what is the framework from which we ensure that the connected platform that we build ensures that bit and doesn't go beyond that one way or the other, right? So I think there's a bit to think about there. Security requires a lot of the data that's used in this ecosystem to be open, and I think we're making large strides there. With the aggregator platforms and the governments coming out and making a lot of this data available to everyone, either free or at a very marginal cost, we're making large strides there. The bit that we need to focus on, I feel, is the infrastructure governance. It's really around policy and infrastructure and the governance we put in place so we ensure that all the benefits that we're trying to bring to our citizen is accomplished. The aspirational objectives are accomplished, and we don't get distracted along that way.
Right. The other thing that struck me as we were discussing this, we talk a lot about the prime examples, right? So Seoul, Singapore, even Hong Kong, Tokyo. How do we allow, in other words, how do we propagate some of these solutions that are being developed, these paragons or gleaming examples of smart cities, to maybe cities which were not built with that in mind? For example, some of the cities in the region, Jakarta, Manila, they were not built to be smart cities. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about this. You talked about this, which is a strategy of trying to decentralize some of that and to build around the city so you can get that going. But I mean, what are are there solutions?
Like
Sally, yeah?
the projects that we are in, Ascender Sing Bridge, I would say because we have been in this business for almost 30 years. We entered Suzhou, Bangalore, after which Southeast Asia, so China, India, and now all our projects are at different parts of its product life cycle. So there are infrastructures that are built based on old technologies. How do we wire or rewire them? Greenfield site is easy. Greenfield site, we can just put things in. So how do we do in China In China, as I mentioned, right now we do have ready-built factories, built-to-suit facilities, offices, business parked. When Ascender Singbridge conceptualized The Bridge, a co-working business that we were in, we started that in Singapore. We wanted to build a physical space, and we took all in about maybe close to 24 months to get that physical infrastructure up. And right now we do have a business in which we are also collaborating with T in the same development. Where else in China, where all our buildings are off built and we wanted to put in this bridge, we decided that we do not need to do a physical space. And what we did is we got in an application, an app. So now, right now, today, we have the Bridge app. It takes about 6 months for us to get the app ready. Within 2 months, we launch it. So within 9 months, we had an app. And upon launching, we have 10,000 customers, all in this platform. And today, most of our customers in our varied form of our buildings are on this platform. So I think, again, talking about infrastructure, talking about physical infrastructure versus a digital infrastructure. In China, we are able to do this. In Singapore, I guess we are still doing the physical, and we are also doing the digital. And I think in different parts of the cities, they'll be looking at different part of this and how then can we come in to build or to solve some of these issues.
The good thing is obviously also technology is helping us, right? Technology is moving ahead to an extent where we are now able to retrofit existing areas, reaping benefits which maybe before would have been difficult to do in terms of traffic management, for example. You can do a lot with the existing infrastructure by doing it more smartly, right? So we have now wireless networks. We don't need to cable everything anymore, right? We will get 5G. We will have enough capacity to do all of that, have millions of sensors around the city. It's possible, actually, all this stuff now. And that doesn't require actually redoing everything. Of course, there will be limitations, and of course, infrastructure will have to keep up with it also. But the good thing is we don't need to start from scratch necessarily. The same is true for buildings too, right? We can retrofit existing buildings these days, existing spaces, right?
Yes.
And so in that regard, technology is really supporting us in that regard. What I find is another important aspect is that we need to get the cities to work together. We are still seeing that a lot of these smart city approaches are very different. If I talk to the 100 smart cities in India, very different requirements, very different focus to what the guys doing in China, in Korea, in Singapore, somewhere else, and in, obviously then also in the developing countries, Indonesia, even Myanmar, etc. What would be really good, and I see the initial signs of that starting to happen, is to actually group together, to develop some use cases which make sense across cities actually, which will then allow, first of all, everybody to take advantage of the work which is already being done, let's say here in Singapore or in Tokyo or somewhere else. And on the other side, also make it more affordable, because of course, if you do bespoke stuff all the time, it's expensive, right, ultimately. And so I think there's a tremendous benefit in the cities coming together in a network. I think there's an ASEAN-driven network now being established, Smart City Network. I think that's a great idea. It needs to come down to a more operational level. It's at the moment very politically driven, but we need to go down to the use cases, harmonize them, drive consistent approaches, synergies across that. And I think then there's a very good chance that that separation, that gap between Tokyo, Singapore, and other cities and the rest, like Jakarta was mentioned before, or others, doesn't grow that big actually, because that's also for us not good actually, because we are developing solutions which then might not be quickly replicated elsewhere, and as a result the business case is sometimes hard to do.
You mentioned, Thomas, you mentioned technologies and how that is facilitating the growth of smart cities, getting cheaper, more accessible. I just throw this out to the channel. I mean, in terms of looking ahead, 5, 10, 20 years from now, which you think are the most critical technologies which would accelerate the growth of smart cities, not just in the leading examples, but maybe in some of the other second or third tier cities which have yet to adopt and embrace the smart city vision? Which are the, George, maybe?
Yeah, so I'll sort of divide this into two parts. One part is really about the infrastructure that supports all of this activity, and then the products and services that you build on top of that, right? At the heart of all of this, the whole smart city framework is an IoT platform, right, which has lots of hardware in it. It produces large amounts of data, is what we typically call data exhaust, right? Some very relevant, lots that are probably not relevant, but lots of data is produced. You then start making sense out of that data by building platforms on top of that, analytic platforms which run on machine learning algorithms, artificial intelligence routines. On top of that are stood up products and services. And if you're thinking about those products and services that are going to be most useful in the next 3 to 5 years, there's a laundry list of items. So assisted automated vehicles that deliver people and products in a different way than it was done before. Smart grids that help the urbanization of large cities where lots of people are now wanting to live in the cities and they're coming through, and the optimization of energy becomes of paramount importance. I think the challenge in all of this, deciding on what is more important than the other, is one of prioritization. So in my mind, would you actually prioritize getting the ICT infrastructure to a certain level, or would you actually prioritize trying to get good, clean drinking water to other parts of the world that don't get that today? Both need to be done, right? It's a matter of what you go after first. Underpinning all of this is that infrastructure that I spoke about. That's absolutely required. We're going to have to invest in it. That's the only way you can stand up these products and services you're talking about.
Yeah, I
Look
think
at
for me,
space.
one of the biggest single pieces of technology that's impacted smart cities in the last 10, 15 years has been the pure level of connectivity. If you think about Wi-Fi networks, you think about 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G, and that accessibility within cities, which will enable you to then power things like sensors, having smart buildings, this kind of thing. At least from our point of view, that's given people the connectivity to be able to buy and research and find their properties. So suddenly, consumers are empowered for the first time to be able to see what properties are available. And we have 25 million people every single month now looking for property through that connectivity across the markets that we're in Southeast Asia. Now, if you think about what's going to be the future for the next 10 or 15 years, what's the biggest challenges? Of course, there are lots. We talked about inclusivity, we talked about affordability, we talked about environment. But for me, one of the most fundamental things around quality of life is around the whole mobility piece. And I think if you then start to think about autonomous vehicles, the impact that will have purely on the efficiency of infrastructure and transport and the quality of life that will bring, I think that's going to be big. And if you then take that even further away, you start talking about flying cars and how you then manage all of that. It's a whole minefield between different government bodies and flying things versus on the ground things. But I think mobility for me is going to be one of the key things. And that will have a profound impact also on smart cities and real estate. So if I can sit in my car and work in my car, sleep in my car, be entertained in my car, do I need to be slap bang in the city anymore? Can I go out? And then what's that going to do to real estate prices? Well, real estate prices potentially in the city centres will come down, and then in the suburbs will start to rise. So I think the mobility piece will have a profound impact as a key technology in the next 10 to 15 years for smart cities.
Sally?
That the technology must still make sense to the end user, to the occupants, to the inhabitants. At the city level, whatever technology you put in, it must, for the well-being, at the end of the day, is to connect people. For the space that you build, the technology must again be sensible to them. A smart building, a smart space is only as smart as it can make sense to the end user. So I think we have gone from looking at physical space to how do we optimize space, like what T is doing, how does it optimize the space for his customers and people coming in. And now we are looking at what technology will come in to replace space. So which technology will, we may not be coming here together to talk, and we may be putting on our VR or our AR machine, and we can assimilate that we are here together talking. So
And we're back at Ready Player One, right?
I think so. I think to me, besides technology, I think the one thing that will really help, future-proof is actually data. I think a lot more emphasis has to be put into how we collect data, how data are related to one another. Technology always evolves, right? With the keyword today, everybody talks about AI, blockchain, and everything else in between. In fact, a lot of entrepreneurs out there walking around, if they say the word blockchain AI, apparently money just keeps coming into them. Quite different from us, Steve, back in the days when we were raising funds as entrepreneurs, right? But to me, data is important, right? Data is how you, at least for WeWork, we use data a lot to really understand how our meeting rooms are being used. We use heat map, we use sensors to figure out where people are at any point in time of the day. So we can optimize the use of the space, the density, going back to, buildings that are 30 years old. We know we're not going to be building buildings all over the place again, but how do we go back to the legacy buildings and products, and how do we rekindle that? Data, right? Data is what we use, using data and using the latest and greatest technology to really bridge all of that together and make it into a smart city. So,
Yeah, it's an interesting point, which is, I think Sally and of course T as well. When you think about the smart city of tomorrow, do we even still need buildings in the way that we conceive physical spaces to be? I mean, when you think about smart cities 20 years from now, smart cities take a long time to grow and develop. Do we still need your office buildings? I mean, you've changed the concept of what it takes to work. You don't have to work in a cubicle space. You can, you reimagine that space that you work. So, I mean, T, what do you think? What's your vision of smart cities? Are there still going to be a physical buildings, 30-story, 40-story skyscrapers, or are we going to have a completely new way of living and working?
yeah, I think what's really important is for us to focus on people, right? For us right now, from a sort of a bread and butter in terms of building collaborative spaces, it's about helping enterprises of all sizes, from one-person company to multinationals, allow them to really just foster innovation, retain and attain talent, and that's something that we focus on a lot on. If you kind of look at what WeWork as a whole company has done, look, we focus on really humanizing, and I use the word humanizing because it's something that is different than just changing, right? Humanizing takes into account people's attributes and what we do as people on a day in, day out. So we're trying to humanize the way we live, we work, and how we connect to the world together. So leveraging buildings, regardless whether they're old or new, retail or commercial, or even lifestyle kind of business, I think this is something that WeWork as a company is looking at. And we're trying to foster solutions to that by building collaborative spaces, not only for work, but for living, for gyms, for schools. We even have a wave-making machine to help build townships, right, as part of the fun factor to helping build campuses in township, let you learn how to surf in terms of a wave-making machine. I know we go a little nutty sometimes at times, but that's the vision that we have. But the core element that we look at is people. And around that, we try to build something that's smart around that. And again, back to opportunities, back to inclusion, and that I believe is what smart cities is all about.
And if you take that even further, I was always wondering, and I'm still wondering, is this concept of a city still the same in the future?
Right.
Because honestly, if you're looking at why cities do exist in the first place, there are big capital requirements for energy infrastructure, for the kind of company infrastructure, transport infrastructure, etc. We touched on a couple of points already where that is probably becoming less and less critical in a way. And you could think about a future where ultimately a lot of the energy generation is going to be decentral. A lot of the manufacturing which we are doing today in centralized spaces is going to be decentral, additive manufacturing, all these kind of things. You can do it anywhere essentially in the future. We have more modular buildings actually. We reduce the amount of transportation which is required by actually having more independent satellites, so to say, right? Where the life is really happening in these satellites, and in a way that is already what is happening here in Singapore.
Correct.
Also, right? We are trying exactly that, right? To come away from one large city into an agglomeration of smaller cities in a way, and communities, right? Which are somewhat self-contained, to minimize the amount of cars on the road, to minimize the impact on our environment, etc. Yeah. So maybe there's a different paradigm actually coming up where it's not about mega cities per se anymore, but where it's about larger agglomerations actually of various satellites ultimately.
Absolutely.
And then maybe the interaction is more virtual of some sort, etc. But you could imagine that, right? And that's something which I can see in 30, 40 years probably, that we're going down a route like that.
If the
Yeah, I
question
think
is
also-
whether building a city is necessary, I would say it is, because if not, we'll be out of job, out of business. But the manifestation, the concept of how a city is to be built, agree, will probably take a different paradigm, different shift. Like how we built Guangzhou Knowledge City, like you mentioned, manufacturing. Guangzhou used to be a big manufacturing hub, and the government is looking at moving the manufacturing away. And on the micro level of about just 123 square kilometers, we are helping build this Guangzhou Knowledge City. And why is it necessary? The government, the enterprises, the corporations, the academia would still like to come to a place for the industries, for accessibility to markets. So building this city is just more than just building the physical buildings. We are looking at putting in industry cluster for them. Industries like new ICT, new energy, clean energy, looking at biomedical, biotech, even intellectual property industry cluster becomes important for a city like that.
So we'll go from a single smart city to a group of smart cities to a smart country, where buildings are no longer defined by, okay, this is residential, this is commercial, this is office, this is retail, which typically happens around the world today in terms of licensing, far more mixed, and the whole lines blur completely in these smaller satellite cities.
Yes.
George, do you have a view on this, though?
Just to add to what was being discussed, the concept of data was brought up, and I just wanted to bring that into the mix here, because a lot of the contributing factors towards what we just discussed is going to be that data component that establishes the connectivity between these cities. And the limitations, it also presents some opportunities, and the opportunities really are stemming from two areas, I think. One is the lack of data pre-smart city, right, is going to provide us some limitations in the post-smart city area as well. And so there is an action, a task for us to really go out and sort out the data that is being consumed, used in these buildings, et cetera, if we want to move faster in the direction we're talking about. That's one. The other bit is back to your question about security. Not as much security, but what is, there's these terms out there, data valence, like surveillance, right? We had the incident in Singapore where the smart lamp was, there was fear around the fact that it was actually surveying your identity. And there were some concerns raised about that. So are we, alongside progressing conversations, discussions about contracts in this regard, data contracts between a citizen and a government or an association or a collection of bodies that might include private sector and public sector. All of us know, and sorry, T, I'm not looking at you because I'm sitting like this, and it becomes really difficult for me to turn around. But what I'm saying is, we work, and others like us will realize that a lot of the things that we want to do smartly in our buildings today, we're going to have to put in a little bit of a clause in our employment contracts for our employees walking in the door, so that we can actually put the sensors and do the things that we're trying to do. That is part of an employment contract evolving with additional lines and chapters. If you take that further, what does that mean in a smart city context? I'm a citizen, I have a passport for that country, and I'm living in a smart country. What is the contract that I have with the authorities in being able to contribute to the smart city working effectively? Am I comfortable with all of that? Opportunity, not a challenge, but those are those two areas. And I was reading recently about Barcelona. Somebody mentioned Spain, very actively moving forward with a smart city concept, and they've introduced a data contract that is also digitally enabled. Whether that is the right answer, I'm not one to say, but those are the types of things that need to be thought about, so we can just blaze our way through the directions Thomas and Steve were mentioning.
Okay, I think we've run out of time. Please join me in thanking the 5 panelists on board and sharing their expertise and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.